And speaking of Russia, this week Russian and Syrian military pilots began the first of presumably many joint air patrols along the Golan Heights, right along Israel's border, raising concerns over Israel's ability to conduct airstrikes against Iranian targets in the country. Joining us to discuss this latest maneuver and Israeli-Russian relations in general is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Middle East expert and lecturer at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So Russia and Israel maintain warm ties, Vladimir Putin inviting Prime Minister Naftali Bennett for a visit in Moscow. And yet, we are seeing Russian patrols with Syria along Israel's borders, joint Russian Navy drills with Iran. So where does this leave the Israel-Russia relationship?
Well, much more than what you and me know about what happens between Israel and Russia is being behind the scenes. There is apparently a very close coordination on military issues connected to the Syrian issue. Israel insists on its right to attack Iranian targets in Syria in order to prevent the settlement of Iran in Syria and turning Syria into something like Yemen or Iraq. And I believe that the Russians do agree to this eager of Israel in order to prevent the turning of Syria into something like Yemen. However, Russia cannot be Zionist, cannot allow Israel to do whatever Israel likes to do in Syria. And this is where we are now in some kind of a point which will, in one side, allow Israel to continue its attacks against the Iranian presence in Syria, while saving the Syrian sovereignty over the land of Syria. And this is not easy to bridge between these two poles.
Now, does Russia have a clear strategy when it comes to Israel and to the Middle East, to the whole region?
Russia has a clear strategy, which is whatever serves the interests of Russia is positive. Whatever does not serve the interests of Russia is negative. And this evaluation of everything is being done apparently on a daily basis. When something serves the Russian interests, so the Russians actually allow. When something does not serve their interest or acts against their interest, they do not allow it. And the decisions are being made, I think, on a daily basis.
But what are Russia's interests? You want to elaborate on that?
The ultimate interest is to put the Russian hand on the Syrian gas, which, after all, Syria has much gas, way beyond what Israel has, under the Mediterranean Sea, and not only. This is the ultimate goal of the Russians, in order to prevent the entering of Syria into the gas market as a free country, because this market is today limited to Russia, Qatar, more or less, and Iran, of course. Iran, Russia, and Qatar. And Russia does not want any other country to take part of this market. Neither Israel, nor Syria, nor anyone else. Now, on Israel, they cannot control Israel because Israel is acting according to Israel's interests. However, in Syria, they do have their influence, and this is the real reason why Russia entered Syria almost 5 years ago in order to make sure that Assad remains in power, so Assad can handle the Syrian gas to Russia.
All right, now we're almost out of time, but I just have one final question. How concerned should Israel be regarding Russia's relationship with Iran and the joint naval drills?
Well, Israel is concerned about Iran with Russia or without Russia. This is to begin with. Secondly, Netanyahu was the prime minister. He had a direct access to Putin, and whenever Netanyahu wanted, he could go to Putin and to settle issues with him. I'm not so sure that this time, when Bennett and Lapid are in charge of foreign policy, I really don't know how much the door of Putin is open for them at any time, as it was in the days of Netanyahu. Maybe Lieberman here is the facilitator. I'm not sure. Maybe Elkin as well.
All right, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, we are out of time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at iltv.tv and watch from any device.